we're now moving on to the session that deals with, well, here's London as a good brand, here's our global competitive position. We know that New York, Shanghai, Beijing are there in the frame, perhaps trying to catch up. So what's London going to look like in 20 years' time? What would it need to look like if we're going to remain globally competitive? What have we got to do to keep our edge? And who's going to do it? And London First has gathered another glittering galaxy of talent for this panel, all of whom I'm sure are well known to you. Ian Hawksworth on my right, CEO of Capco. On my far right, I'm not speaking politically here, because of course I've got Robin on my left. On my far right, Alison Nimmo, Chief Executive of the Crown Estate. On my left, the shy, retiring Mayor of Newham, Sir Robin Wales. A great example of what political leadership can do for regeneration and progress. And on my left, David Atkins, the CEO of Hammerson. So what we're looking at here are a number of questions. What are the factors that are driving the developers and the thinkers about actually doing stuff for the next 10 or 15 years in London? What factors are they taking into account? Ben Page has told us that all predictions are going to be wrong, but they have to work on certain assumptions, and population growth will clearly be one of those. What are the barriers to progress? But I don't want to dwell too much on the negatives. We've dealt with some of those issues, and we hope that today's growth and infrastructure bill may be more than cosmetic and will actually facilitate growth, as Landsec has said about their development in Victoria. And what are the hotspots that are going to emerge in London? Are there going to be shifts in the centre of gravity? Is it going to be more of the same? We just need to explore those questions for half an hour before we take questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask Alison Nimmo to start, because we've heard a lot about how cities around the world only really succeed. The most important element is firm leadership, a clear vision, a strategy, and the ability to put that into action in a plan. Now, words like vision and strategy don't often get associated with London, at least not before the advent of a London mayor. And the one organisation par excellence, Grosvenor will also, Peter Vernon's here, take a long-term view, but the Crown Estate is able to take a very long-term strategic view. And I've asked Alison to share her thoughts with us to start with about the forces, the market forces and the considerations that the Crown Estate is taking into account in planning to develop a modern London. Alison.
Thanks, Louis. We were talking this morning about time frames and looking forward 8 years, but that's sort of almost tomorrow in Crown Estate terms. We've been around since the Norman conquest in thought, and certainly in terms of our view, sort of long-term planning, we should be looking not at 2020, but 2120, or certainly 2030, 2040, 2050. And some of the challenges we talked about this morning won't be solved in short political time frames. We really do need to be taking a long-term view, and successful cities have a clear vision and a clear plan for delivery. And maybe it's not such a popular view, but I think London has to be clear about what long-term success looks like. And it's not about just accepting growth, any old growth, and that growth is always good. I think London needs to plan its growth properly and to do it on its own terms. And yes, I'm very confident about the future of London. I absolutely love London, and its oxygen and success is going to come from international status, patronage and investment, and we're reaping the rewards of that on places like Regent Street, working in partnership with the Norwegian government with Norwich International. But cities also need to work at a local level. Placemaking and quality is really important, and if Regent Street and what we're now rolling forward into St James's is a good model, it takes time, it takes effort, and it's looking at the totality of a place. It's not just about the bottom line in terms of the quantitative things that you can measure, but it is about the quality of place, and it is about placemaking, and it's actually creating different bits of the city where people really want to come, really want to be, really want to invest. I think looking ahead, I think the pace of change is going to accelerate. you know, if you look at the next generation, I feel a bit of a dinosaur sometimes, but you look at the next generation in terms of how fast things are moving, and particularly on the international scene, it's going to be more digital, more mobile, more wireless, and more green. And we touched on sustainability this morning. I thought John's question was a very hard-hitting question. The response of the property industry is often just, well, we're going to make our buildings greener and we're going to be more environmentally friendly. But sustainability is more fundamental than that. And I think, you know, some of the challenges, and in the next session on housing, I think it'll come out very clearly, some of the issues around social equity. You know, the riots were only a year ago up in Tottenham. I think social equity and economic equity and getting young people into jobs are all things that London needs to tackle. So yeah, we're looking at this through a property lens, but I think the solutions and the future success of London on a much broader scale. But London undoubtedly starts from a fantastic position of strength. Yes, we've got to capitalise on the Olympics. Not just in terms of, you know, when we really get our act together and we're really focused, we can do it. And the success behind the Olympics was a huge and focused and expert delivery team. I mean, it didn't happen by accident. It was a very well-resourced project in terms of delivery. But I think the intangible thing the Olympics did on a sort of international stage, which is where we play, was about brand London, brand UK. I think that was almost more powerful in terms of tourism and people looking at us as a very sort of open and transparent place to do business. And some of the things that Martin touched on this morning, you know, things like trust, things like reputation, things like integrity are just as important as, you know, the amount you can return on your bottom line. And say that's why the Norwegians and some of these big sovereign wealth funds want to come and do business in London. I think, you know, I posed the question, and as Robin's on the panel here, about, you know, where the growth is going to come from, and it was interesting seeing the response on the questions before. As we're the biggest landowner in core West End, we own 8 million square feet in the West End. You can see where I voted from the beginning. I'm not going to let Robin get all his way in terms of all the growth going east. Clearly, I do think the Olympics will be a tipping point in terms of growth in East London, and that was one of the whole purposes of putting the Olympics out there in terms of infrastructure and growth, and just showing people the potential in East London. But it comes from a low base. But the real heart of London, the West End, some of the challenges we've got with our 8 million square feet is about reinvesting in our buildings, moving them forward. And I think the point that was made this morning about obsolescence, not just from an environmental point of view, is a really critical issue. I think some of the sort of intangible qualities of London, the whole sort of culture and the livability of the city, and just a cool place to be. When Telefonica Digital were looking for their global headquarters, they were sort of saying, you know, Silicon Valley or Regent Street, and they made the right choice and came to Regent Street, not just because we were a great partner, but it's, you know, it is that location, and it's about the feel of the city. And I think from the Honor Chapman report, I love this phrase, hedonistic tolerance of London. You know, we mustn't lose that sense of real openness and tolerance and the sort of the diversity that we have as a city, and that was shown fantastically during the Games. We talked quite a lot this morning about infrastructure, and the subplot was really around transport. And I think we just need to broaden, maybe in this section, the debate out a little bit more into another key bit of our business, which is energy, and particularly green energy. And if we can't get our policies and our delivery right, then the lights are going to go off in the next 5 to 6 years. I think it really is a critical issue. And not only reliability and resilience of energy supplies, but also green energy and decarbonising our current energy. But again, that'll be interesting to see what people's views have got about on that in terms of the policy perspective. I just think just a couple of final points. I think retail is going to be really important to the overall offer of London as a sort of tourism destination, and people that do business here also like to shop and eat, and as I say, it's that wonderful offer. We're not short of really top quality global brands beating a path to Regent Street and hopefully St James's as we go forward. But with a circle of Westfields around London and internet shopping, lots of challenges ahead, and I'm sure David will say more about that. And then, looking forward to 2030, 2040, 2050, I think, one of the key things, in terms of growth and the type of growth and where it happens will be, will we be so fixated about GDP, or will GNH, gross national happiness, be just as important in terms of, the kind of people that are working and where they're working, and the kind of people that want to be in London, and the sort of brain power and knowledge industry. So don't forget gross national happiness in this whole debate. And I have to confess I'm a town planner as well, so there won't be any planner bashing in this session.
Alison, thank you very much. I think hedonism and happiness is a cue for Ian Hawksworth to talk to us about his view of the sort of factors that are shaping Capco on a rather shorter term horizon than some of the powder states.
We've only got half an hour.
Yep.
I think Alison's covered most of it. Look, what turns us on as developers is hedonism and happiness. I'm a happy developer in hedonistic London. Let's get it out there. This is the best city in the world. People talk about other cities. No, there is only one global city on the planet, and that is London. There are others. New York's having a go, Hong Kong's having a go, Shanghai, Beijing, those places are miles away. They are domestic cities with global activity. London is a truly global, international city. Everybody's welcome, everybody can do business, everybody can make money. We launched our business here 2 years ago. Market cap was £600 million. It's now £1.75 billion. We could not have done that in any other city. Why do we continue to invest in this town, and why do we want to? Well, what we really are after is a level playing field. What you need is the state and those that represent the state to make sure that there's consistency in policy, that they encourage entrepreneurial investment, and they reward that. Cities grow through private investment. They do not grow through state intervention. The state creates the environment in which companies can invest, in which people want to live and work here. And we've heard all about the demographics here. It's the youngest population probably in the UK, probably one of the youngest and most vibrant populations in the world. It's also the most productive workforce in the world. That productivity is actually in the centre. So in terms of absolute economic growth over the next 20 years, it's going to come from the centre. In terms of rates of economic growth, it'll probably come from the outside, which is all to do with the nature of London. Most cities, as they get bigger, they tend to increase density, they expand outwards. I mean, London is restricted by the green belt, it's restricted by Zone 1 is basically a conservation area, so it's very difficult to do anything. Now, that's good in the long run, but there's got to be these areas that take up the strain, and that's infrastructure driven. So the state has to provide that infrastructure. But it's a state of mind. I mean, your analysis of the national state of happiness, basically London has to keep continuing to attract the brightest and the best, and it has to reward those. And companies that then come will compete for the future. What we mustn't have is constantly changing environmental aspects related to politics, related to short-term issues, that really make it very difficult for the capital markets and investors to decide, well, what's my risk profile here? London's in great shape, and in many respects, the less we do to alter it, the better. So for me, your question, in 10, 15 years' time, I actually don't want to see any change.
More of the same.
I want to see more of the same, but I want us to really believe that this is the best city in the world. Everybody else envies this city. I can assure you that the reason money is coming here in the way, 50% of all new capital in the real estate market in Europe came to the UK last year. And that's consistent and that's really, when they talk about London, they really mean Zone 1. That's what the international markets think of. That's because this is the best place on the planet to do business, period. And if we stop that, whether that's tourism coming, whether it's visas, whether it's work permits, whether it's education, whether it's tax on profit. If we change that, we will significantly alter the competitive position of this city in the long run. That will be a disaster.
Ian, thank you. I'm going to try and restrain Robin for a moment on growth and talk, cue in David, just to talk about your vision of how the retail, office, residential scene is going to change from your perspective.
Yeah, I'm just coming back on Ian. I absolutely agree, Ian. I think, though, we've got to be careful that, and even this conference, when we talk about London, we still naturally think of W1, EC4, you know, and 2 miles ring around that. And absolutely, best city in the world, you know, great restaurants, great retail, great residential. But no one in this room lives in that area. You know, we all live out in home counties or in Fulham or Wandsworth or wherever. And I think we've got to, as an industry, be thinking about the outer boroughs. There are parts of London which are not great. You know, let's be absolutely frank. They are some of the most deprived parts of this country. And I think my view is that where state intervention really does have a hand is in key infrastructure, at least getting it off the ground. And when one recognises that 17% of the total sovereign wealth globally is targeted on London, then we should be using that sovereign wealth more than simply thinking about residential schemes. We need to put it into some infrastructure as well. And our model is, and as many of you will know, we came out of city offices earlier this year. That wasn't so much a view that city offices are, you know, a basket case, or I could easily sit here and say they are, but it was more the fact that we wanted to put more money into retail and we wanted to get bigger in retail. Personally, I think City of London does have its challenges, because I think the inevitable shift of power and the government's and the regulatory bodies' view that you've got to break the link between the retail bank and the investment bank will weaken those large banks, and their requirements for big headquarters of the size they have today will reduce. So I think City of London has got quite a rocky patch ahead of it. But our view is putting more money into retail-led regeneration is key. And we talk about residential. I think the danger is that people talk about residential in London and think about the high-rise blocks of flats along the river that no one in this room can afford, except Ian. You know, the fact is that we've got to be thinking more about large residential development in the outer boroughs, but those will only work if you bring retail with it. People don't want to live just on a housing estate. They want to have a reason to live there. So you need to build all the component parts with it. And that's why, if you look at Brent Cross Cricklewood, there's 350 acres there. We could build 10 to 15,000 homes, but it will only work if you build the retail to go with it, the schools, the cinemas, the catering. It's exactly the same in Croydon. You know, people don't want to live in Croydon right now because there's no reason to be there in the heart. It's a grim place. So we've got to ensure that you have the links into these places, you build retail and residential, but you do it together. If you do that, then the whole of London really does become great again, rather than this pocket in the middle where, you know, it's where the very wealthy people of the world want to live and want to spend their time.
David, thank you. I'm going to move from W1 to East 20, now becoming an extremely fashionable postcode. No better exponent than Robin to tell us how your view of the shift of the centre of gravity of some of the community building and the economic and job creation, economic growth and job creation is going to happen in the east of London, Robin.
Well, I'll start by saying I was slightly surprised this morning. I think 54% of people thought that East London was where growth was going to be. Yeah, is that right? Yeah, is that right? I don't know. Was that right? Yeah, I wasn't here. What planet did the other 46% live on? Have you come in from some place? I mean, have you looked at London recently? In 1932, when Harry Beck drew up the underground map, there were 16 stations east of the Meridian. There are now 174 stations and crossroads. I mean, there are 200 trains an hour through Stratford, and it's now the best connected place, and we will have the third highest footfall of any station in London, the third highest. and we're just getting started. We have land, and we have land 1/3 the size of Manhattan to develop, right? Why you'd waste your time with a Crown estate in the extreme west of London is entirely beyond me, right?
Clubs off.
And I will, Alison, I'm sorry, you told me you lived in Southwark, right? So out our end. So the truth is that, you know, it's always good to know something personal about people so you can expose the truth that actually she prefers to live out the East End. And who can blame you? Who can blame you? Right, it's also much better politics out the East End than in Wandsworth, say, so I definitely go with that. Look, I do think that there are actually quite a number of points that I think are absolutely correct. I think London is the greatest city in the world. I don't think it stands, we've got to move, or it won't be the greatest city. At the moment, fantastic. There are a number of things we have to do about growth. Clearly the finance industry is very important to London, and we have to think about how we deal with that. But my problem, we're just discussing, I don't think the problem we have particularly in London is planning. I think it's procurement, legal, and all the restrictions and the regulations that tie us up from doing it. I can't place a contract for a year. For a year if I want to respond to something quickly. That's not an environment where you can respond quickly to things. It's not an environment where it's hard enough for politicians to move quickly, but if you give us an excuse not to do something by putting those sort of things, it becomes difficult. In fact, I think it's a problem across Europe because I was at a thing the other day where the chair of Daimler said he was bemoaning lawyers. Any lawyers in the room? So the blood-sucking parasites don't admit to it. Okay, fine. Sorry, that's a quote. And he said he was bemoaning the fact he has 6,000 lawyers and he's trying to build cars. And so I think there are issues around that. There are issues and I think politics gets in the way, short-termism gets in the way very much. And I think unless we can get a situation where, I don't think we will, because I don't think there's any evidence for me that that's happening, but unless we can get to a situation where if we draw a London plan up, everybody in all parties are in agreement with it, it'll change again when we get a mayor of the right political persuasion. So I think the growth of London is important. We need to think, how do you do that? Clearly a great city, you get the concentrations, that's what can happen. So one of the biggest things that's happening, I think, is UCL are talking of moving to Stratford. I believe Imperial are moving to the west. If you get the links with Cambridge, you can then have the sort of support that you need for the knowledge-based industries and the sort of developments, the technology industries that London has to be making a priority of. Manufacturing is collapsing, it will continue to collapse in London, I think we all know that. That's where we make things. Up in the centre of London, they don't do that, right? Manufacturing is what we do elsewhere in London, right? Like Fords and things. You have to explain to the central people what real life's about sometimes, I think. And so manufacturing will decline. And so it's a new technology. But I'll tell you what then's happening. We're hollowing out the jobs market. We're hollowing it out. Sorry, the skills market. What you've got is very high-skilled jobs and increasingly low-skilled jobs. And there's jobs in the middles. They're disappearing, and they're disappearing very rapidly. And the net result of that will be that you're going to see people, very high-skilled people, will can be attracted to London. We need that. We need to continue that. We need to make sure there's the right environment for them. But if you don't get it right at the bottom, you're going to create a major problem. I would say this, but the government's benefit changes are driving the poor out of London, out of central London. They're clearly driving them out of central London. And they won't come to Newham because it's quite expensive in Newham too. They'll bounce over. And I think what you're saying, and if you see the latest sort of the research, central London's becoming wealthier and outer London's becoming poorer. You've got more areas of poverty being created in outer London. So how do you deal with that problem? To be a great city, we are a great city because we live next to each other. We're a great city because we don't have people living separately. And the more you go for that, the less attractive it becomes, the more difficult it becomes to present as, yeah, you can have a little enclave of wealth in the centre, but is that really the London we want to have? Now, that's not against developing wealth and developing skills and developing the sort of opportunities that will bring people here so that we can create wealth. But there are all sorts of issues around social policy that need to be adopted. We need to think about how we move forward. And sort of, if I'm taking housing, we just need to build more housing in London. But it's interesting, we come up in Newham with an idea, we want to create 2,500 affordable homes. All we need to do is do a bit with our housing that's currently social. The government's saying, oh, we're not sure about that. we're not sure about letting you do that. And we'll do it without any government money or any government funding. And that's about trying to understand. And I think the problem we get is that central government doesn't understand London, doesn't understand where we're going. And I would say for both parties that's been true. Naturally, I'd also say that Ed Miliband's getting it right now, and it's well worth voting Labour at the next election. That's dangerous saying that to this audience. I thought that was quite, showing I've got a bit of courage here. So I don't imagine many of you vote in a sensible way. So I think there are social issues. We would say, for example, the developments in East London that took place, I know not a penny was wasted when the Olympics was built, was it, John? Not a penny. And thank you for the £9.2 billion. We had a blast. It was great. But one of the things about creating opportunities, like in Canary Wharf, which is a fantastically important part of Britain, jobs didn't go to local people because in London it's an international city. So there's international competition, particularly at the lower end of jobs. So what we found was when we were trying to get people jobs in Newham, 2%, if we presented a CV to people, 2% got jobs. But if we worked with businesses and presented the right people, 50% got jobs. That's from a borough, remember, that 1/3 were born outside the UK and 2/3 weren't born in London. But 50% of people get into jobs. Those are the kind of lower skill jobs. And one challenge I'd have for all of you is this. What effort do you make when recruiting at the lower end to think about how you're going to try and make a difference to people who have been long-term unemployed? Now, I don't mean take people that you don't want. I think it's stupid. The idea that employers have to change what they want to meet the needs of employees is stupid. I completely opposed it. But actually, if you take the experience we found in Newham, with Westfield, I'm sorry, John Burton from Westfield's gone, but with Westfield, with John Lewis and with others, you'll find that you can actually interview people who are, half the people we got into jobs were long-term unemployed, and the employers liked what they saw. So I would challenge you, and I'd challenge out and say, if you're recruiting people in low-skilled jobs, ask to see people who are long-term, just see them. If you don't like them, don't take them. So, and I think that begins to then help to make sure the wealth isn't isolated in a small pocket. Because if that's what happens, the political ramifications are significant. And I think that's the sort of thing that will make London untenable.
I think it's a very good point. David, do you want to come back on
well,
that?
I think as an industry we do more than is being said. And particularly in the retail terms, we, for many years, the schemes we've built, whether it's Birmingham, Bristol, Leicester, Aberdeen, we do the recruiting for the retailers. So we organise training, and you have people like John Lewis, Debenhams, that will guarantee, if they've been through the Hammerson-sponsored interview training, career development training, they will guarantee them an interview. And so you end up in places like Bristol and Leicester, and it would be exactly the same in Croydon. You get 50 to 60% of the people who get jobs with the retailers are coming off the long-term unemployment list. Now that makes a massive difference to people's lives. And I think, again, with retail, we've got to get away from this perception that they're not real jobs, and all it is someone moving from Boots to Topshop, and you're not creating a job at all. You are, and I think the industry is doing far more than
I think you'll find most people in the real estate industry agree with you. I don't think there's anything you said there that we would disagree with, particularly where you're dealing with large-scale schemes. And we've got one that we're doing, hopefully going to do in Hammersmith and KNC, which has 1,500 affordable and social. It creates 13,000 new jobs. It's retail-driven. What I'm after, though, is consistency amongst the leadership classes. I mean, we can only play with the cards that are dealt. If you're likely to take the cards away or change the game, then it's very difficult with real estate, which is a long-term business. It's not just the Crown that are long-term. If you embark on one of these long-term investments, you're in there pretty much forever. You've got to assume that. So real estate's a long-term business, and you're through several political cycles, you're through several economic cycles. We've just got to have a consistency of process, which is why I will never attack the planning system. We know it's difficult, we know it's troublesome, but it's consistently difficult and troublesome. I don't understand what social housing policy is in London. I don't know what's going to happen with development taxation in London. I've no idea what the government's going to do with income taxes. I don't know what the policy on immigration and visas are. We had a significant drop in consumers in the West End in the summer because the Chinese couldn't get the visas. They all went to Paris and New York. It's the little things. We tend to talk about these big macro things, But actually, it's the little things that people notice, and it's the little things where you've got to be consistent. That's all we want. If you're consistent, the money will be there. If the money's there, the opportunity's there, and that's what drives economic growth.
I'm going to stop us there for a minute because I've got lots more questions for the panel, but I'm sure you have too. Lots of food for thought here. I think I was particularly taken by Robin's broader point about the risk of a city that is very much polarised between the extremely wealthy, possibly not even living here full time, probably not even living here full time, and the very poor, and the risks that London runs from that increased polarisation. But in view of the time, can I just stop the panel just for a moment and just take questions from the floor? Anyone want to challenge anything they've heard? Anything? Yes.
Far be Brian Lincoln, Geoffrey Green Russell. Far be it from me to disclose to which profession I belong.
He's a lawyer.
And in view of the fact that the law does play a significant part in the property and construction industry, and apart from my own firm, there are some very, very good law firms in property and construction in London. Would Sir Robin like to expand briefly on this strange tale of his doings which take a year to conclude?
Just very brief, if you can, Robin.
Yeah, it's the regulations for procurement. It was interesting, when we got Siemens wanted to build a building down in the docks, they asked us to do planning in 20 weeks, we did it in 9. And it went up the land was owned by GLA and us, and it went up in 18 months. Because if you really want to do it, you can do it. The difficulty we've got is, and it's not the law's fault this, the difficulty we've got is increasing regulation. When I started being mayor a few years ago, I didn't have to worry about JRs every time we did anything. We're doing stuff that we know people want. We're looking to license our private rented sector, some of which is very bad. It's really popular with our residents, and we have to take a year because of the threat of JR, which is nonsense. The ability to move quickly is hampered by increasing legislation. I don't actually blame the laws, I just think it's an easy target. Actually, I blame the fact that MPs have nothing better to do with their time than legislate, and they just end up legislating all the time, and to very little. Well, it just creates more and more difficulties, and it just seems to me we continue down that track with more legislation and more difficulties. I find, just as an aside, I find if you're trying to make children safe, every time there's a review, you get 100 recommendations and you get a vast swathe of additional regulations you have to follow. Does it make kids safer? Of course it doesn't. It just increases our bureaucracy. So I wasn't really having a go at the lawyers, it's just a cheap target.
Right, any more questions from non-lawyers in the room? I think would be good. Yes, one here. Table 9.
Thank you. It's Steve Edge from Edge Design, and I'm in Shoreditch, a good manor. And it's for you again, Robin. It's very interesting what you say about the lower end of the market of employing people. I think it starts long before there. I mean, we have lived in Shoreditch all our lives, and there is a local school that we support called Central Foundation Boys School. Mm-hmm. There's 54 different spoken languages in this school. We have a great relationship with them. We want the kids to come and do work experience with us. For the simple reason is maybe we don't want the white middle class kids because they're all looked after all right. Or, they're always going to get looked after. But the kids from this school have really not a lot of chance. So what we do, we get the kids, they come and do work experience. First of all, don't make them make tea. We get them working and obviously on the creative level, and these kids are really creative. Obviously, you get a good relationship with the teachers who's going to send the bright kids that are really keen on being a creative and an artist. And actually, it makes a big difference. And I think we have to really embrace this. And everybody in this room, if you are going to have work experience from kids, get a good relationship with your local school. Find out, who's the right teachers to talk to, and they'll send you good kids, and it starts from there, and we have to give these kids a good opportunity.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree. I think we all have a part to play in making sure that the polarisation of the city and the increasing disenfranchisement of a large section of the population, particularly the young, doesn't happen. I think all of us have a role to play. I think we'd all agree with that. Anyway, I'm conscious of time. Giles is giving me probably a warning in a moment. Any more questions? Anything on vision, leadership, the position of the long term? Anything on the consistency of process that Ian talked about? Do we feel that government has got it? Is there the sort of consensus that John talked about, reinforced by Robin, around the Olympic all-party belief in what you wanted to achieve by when? Yes.
Just a quick thought on the point, Patricia Brown, central on the issue about leadership and the long term, is when we've got 4-year terms, with the exception of Newham, for most of our political leaders. How can, and as it's already been talked about, sometimes it's the property sector who are there for the long term. How can the political imperative work on behalf of the future if you're only thinking about being voted in May 2014 or wherever?
Alison, do you want to just comment on the Crown Estate's rising above politics and keeping a long-term view despite constant political change?
Well, we think of ourselves as Geneva, really. We have to be politically neutral and sort of work within the system, but and I think that can be done because most of the system is run by sort of sensible people that want to make things happen, certainly in most of the places that we operate. I think the big challenge I was sort of saying was about creating that big strategic plan, though, and you can't do it in 4-year or 5-year or 6-year bites. So it really is about having that big conversation around what does success look like in London in 20, 30 years' time, because and it comes back to John's panel that he's been co-opted to chair. How do you get beyond the politics and actually get some coalescence around we've got to make these big investments, and we've got to make some decisions, and then we've got to stick to them because there's big long delivery times. And whether it's on energy policy, whether it's on aviation policy, or some of the social policy that Robin was talking about, other countries do get it and they grapple with this, and I do think politics gets in the way. Some of my history in Sheffield and Manchester, we managed to get round the politics and put the city first, and that was the key to success, long-term success.
Ian, Hong Kong, Singapore?
Well, no, politics is politics. It's the reality in which we live in. It's a consistency of economic policy. I think actually if you sit most people down in the UK and say what do they want long-term economic growth, they want better education, they want jobs, and they want a nice place to live. What tends to happen, I think, with cycles is that people come up with these grand plans or these grand gestures that are fashionable. And it's those things that I think we've actually got to avoid. A level playing field is what drives economic growth. What we have to do in London is make sure that we pick up global growth, which is really what London tracks of, let's say, 3 or 4%. The world's getting richer, the West's getting poorer. That's the reality we're in. We mustn't slump back and just believe that the benchmark is UK economic growth. So it's a consistency of economics, consistency of policy. I agree, if we can sort out the delivery, it would be wonderful, but it's never going to happen. Legislation legislates, there's more and more of the stuff, but that's the deal. But you've got to encourage the investors to get on and do it.
We've got one last question from SW1 postcode, I think, over there.
Rosemary McQueen again. Consistency's come up both in this session and also in the previous session, consistency of policy, legislation, practice, process, etc. How are people actually going to shift away from that, bearing in mind that the government is saying we want neighbourhood plans, we want localism? Already 10 proposals for local neighbourhoods in Westminster, likely to be 20 by the end of that. So how are people actually going to work with 20 different neighbourhood plans?
I think we'll ask Robin. We've got 60 seconds on this one. Robin, do you want to comment on how to transcend the localism
I
issues?
believe that localism and putting things down to the lowest level is the one way we can get some consistency and some coherence. It's very interesting in London, even before, or just as the mayor was being elected, I chaired London councils and worked very closely with the Conservatives there, Eddie Lister there, and we worked very closely for the benefit of London because we understood what we were trying to do for London and we didn't have to play quite the same sort of games. It's the same in any area, and no, I have to be elected every 4 years too, so we're clear. It's just we're very popular in Newham. And what we have to do, I think if you can put it down to a more local level, you have a chance of beginning to then take a long-term view. on a number of local areas, which then removes government from that, and they can focus perhaps on bigger, more strategic issues. Why they think they have to run the health service is a massive controlled economy. We learned from the Soviet Union you couldn't do that. If they said, these are the things we want, these are the broad things we want, this is where we want to do our research. Now, you make sure locally you're delivering stuff better, you make sure we're getting, and we'll hold you to account for it, we'd have a system that might work. So localism might work. And actually, we're actually pushing a lot of stuff down to a more local level than me, because I think it's important that people get control as much as you can of where they live. So I think it can work, and I think it's actually a step forward in terms of getting government to focus on what it should focus on, which is getting a 20-year plan that it can get agreement with, and we can drive forward. And it is interesting when they work with Crown Estates or the Corporation or UCL, when they work with organisations that think in centuries, government can do that as well.
I think that's probably a good time to finish, because the next Q will be about housing and the localism and strategic agenda around housing, I think. So, Giles, back to you.
Okay, Louis, just a couple of observations and maybe a quick question or two from me. I mean, I think it's really interesting what Sir Robin says about pushing things down to a local level, and it's very laudable that Newham is doing that and pushing through development. But just to pick two boroughs out, which I know drive developers mad, Camden and Tower Hamlets, I think frightens the life out of people if you devolve things too much to them, and they would very much, the development world, like perhaps the GLA to take more of a grip on some boroughs, and also it drives developers absolutely mad that schemes that you've decided to determine in 9 weeks. The official line is 13 weeks. It can take 2 years for projects in parts of London. So great that it's working in some places, but not so good that it's not working in others. So Robin, just a point that came up earlier. I know some people in London government are very worried that we've had 6 billion of central government spending on the Olympics. What would your message be to the rest of the Labour Party and other politicians who might say, hold on, London's had its whack, the rest of the UK should get some more money, what little's left spent on it?
Oh, give us more money. I'm a politician. I'd always spend money. I'm good at that. I agree with you about Tower Hamlets, by the way. Absolutely agree with you. There's a real serious problem that we have as a nation on what's going on in Tower Hamlets, but I won't get into here. Camden I've got more sympathy for. The issue becomes, if you want to create jobs and wealth, you need to have infrastructure, you need to develop infrastructure. Why did the Olympics come to Stratford? They didn't come because, we thought we'd spend it. There was a fantastic transport infrastructure that my council had fought for 25 years. And I have to say, again with opposition from a large swathes of the East End, because some of them were a bit nuts in the 80s and 90s. So we had got that infrastructure. And I think building an infrastructure, building a skills base, to build a skills base, the government can, business has to be given the money or control of it. That's how you're able to create wealth. And the reason why we should invest in London is because it's the biggest wealth creator in the country and will continue to do so. There are a number of other areas. I mean, I support HS2 because I think that can help to get other areas of wealth creation. Put in some proper infrastructure, and that's the answer. And I have to say, I'm told that Tony Travers said, worry about, I want an airport in East London, I want to close Heathrow, and we'll send food parcels to West London in 10 years.
And just the last one for David. We're all saddened, I suppose, by the situation in Croydon. Alders has now shut. I don't think anyone really minds whether it's Hammerson or Westfield who redevelops it, as long as it's someone. What's the latest on that? When are we going to see something happen?
Yeah, thanks, Giles. If I waffle on for a bit. No, look, well, we've put £170 million into Croydon. That's more than any other company in the last 5 years. We're working up schemes for both Central and Whitgift. It's about bringing the two schemes together, creating a hub that really brings the whole of Croydon up. We think we've got the offer. It's for others to decide, I suppose, but all we know is keep going. Next year you'll see some activity, because if nothing else, we've got a scheme for Central, which will be the first phase. You will see some development next year.
Okay. Well, that's been a fantastic session again. Thanks to everyone for all their questions. Let's say thank you to Alison, Ian, Louis, Robin and David.